Grief is debilitating, it's deep, and it's demanding. It's a pain that has no buffer, yet a pain that we have to learn how to process. It's time to become a new you, mentally, emotionally well. Let this shit go. Shame, hurt, insecurities, and triggers. Reclaim your power. When you don't know who you are, you give others the power to define you. What others think about you doesn't matter. What you think and say about yourself creates who and what you are. Ready to activate the power within you? Let's go. Grief is the sorrow we feel when we experience a painful loss. Moving beyond the debilitation that grief can cause requires immense courage, and it is not easy. There is such a great feeling of sadness when we lose something or someone that is very dear to our hearts. And the darkness that accompanies grief can affect us to the core of our soul. Grief is an individual process. There's no one size fits all. There's no manual that tells you how to do it. But grief is something that you have to process for yourself. And you know what? There's some ugliness that comes out on the other side of death. You see people in a way that you might never have seen them before. And people might require things of you, or people might put pressure on you for you to feel that you need to do things a certain way, or you need to process your emotion the way that they feel like you need to process your emotion. But let me tell you something right now. If nobody else has given you permission to grieve the way that you need to grieve, I'm giving you permission today to grieve the way that you need to grieve. Because like I said, grief is deep, it's debilitating, and it's demanding. The demanding aspect of it is it demands that you face it. It demands that you move through it. It demands that you process it. It demands that you feel it. And even though people might not understand your grief, they might not understand the way that you grieve, I want you to know that you can give yourself permission to go through that process in the way that you need to. It's deep because you feel grief in the recesses of your soul. You feel grief all through your body. It is a pain that there is no medication for. It is a pain that there is no escape from. There is a pain that there is no book or manual that tells you how to do it. It is a pain that sometimes prayer can't heal. It is a pain that sometimes nobody can provide comfort for. It is a pain that is an individual process. And it is a pain that needs to be processed. Because if you don't process grief, as grief requires you to process it. Now, there ain't no set way to do it, but there is a requiring to process the grief. And if you don't process grief the way that you need to process grief, you can find yourself in such a dark hole, in such a dark space that it can feel almost impossible to come out of. Grief is demanding because grief requires you to show up in a way that you may never have shown up before. Grief is demanding because grief is bringing you, or loss is bringing you, very specific experiences for the journey of your soul. That requires the grief, unfortunately or fortunately, in order for you to be able to connect to it. Grief is a central theme to my story. I lost a very close friend when I was 22 years old. I lost my only blood sister when I was 31 years old. My father died when I was 41 years old. My mother died when I was 42 years old. But the process of grief, or the experience of death that initiates grief was such a key part of my own personal purpose. It was such a key part of my own personal soul journey that I could not have tapped into the things that I now know, the things that I now understand, the things that I am now able to help my clients with, if I had not gone through those losses, if I had not learned how to process grief the way that grief demanded me to process it. Because the grief that I experienced through the loss that I experienced, through the losses that I experienced, enabled me to really go to that deep place of purpose, to the deep recesses of my soul, to a deeper understanding of life, of what life requires from us, of what life expects from us, and what the process of living life looks like. And the reality is this, and I hope this doesn't sound uncompassionate, but I speak from a place of understanding grief. Please understand that. I speak from a place of having experienced a lot of loss in my life. But the life that we live requires that all of us leave at some point. The life that we live requires that all of us feel pain. The life that we live requires that all of us face pain. The life that we live requires that we move through pain. Grief almost killed me at one point in my life, and I want to share more about that with you. You cannot put levels on pain. A lot of times people try to compare grief with somebody else's grief. Well, if you've not lost a child, you don't understand, the pain of losing a child. If you've not lost a parent, you don't understand the pain of losing a parent. And whilst I agree with that to a certain extent, that it is difficult for you to understand what you have not experienced, right? But loss is loss, and grief is grief to the individual who is processing it. And I feel like it's not fair for somebody to compare their loss with somebody else's loss, to compare their pain with someone else's pain, to compare their process with somebody else's process, right? Because you have some people who have a high tolerance for pain. They can take a whole lot of pain. And then you have some people who have a very low tolerance for pain. So somebody who has a high tolerance for pain might laugh at somebody who is feeling tremendous pain in a situation, a circumstance, or through an experience that they feel is minimal. But it's not fair for you to do that, because everybody's process is their individual process, and everybody gets the right to feel and go through their process, especially as it pertains to grief, in the way that they need to. Like I said, grief is a huge part of my story. I like to say that grief is really the nucleus of my story, because my experiences with grief, starting at 10 years old when my maternal grandmother passed, it was the gateway for me being able to tap into the gifts that I have, being able to tap into the spiritual connection that I have. So I'm grateful for every experience of grief now on the other side of it. However, it really wasn't easy when I was dealing with it. Lost one of my best friends when I was 22 years old. Lost my sister to a car accident when I was 31 years old. Lost my father to sickness and illness when I was 41 years old. Lost my mother to a car accident when I was 42 years old. Lost two half sisters when they were 28 and 38. So I've cried a lot. I've experienced a lot of pain on the other side of losing loved ones, on the other side of grief. And when my sister got killed in a car accident, it took me to a very dark place. I remember one day running out of my house and screaming for my mother. But my father came, because every morning was very hard. Like when you lose a loved one, the mornings are hard because you kind of wake up wishing that it was all a bad dream. And I remember running out and screaming for my mother, and my father came out, and I ran into his arms. And I remember saying to him, "Daddy, it hurts so bad. It hurts so bad. Take the pain away. It was a pain that there was no medication for. It was a pain that there was no numbing for. It was a pain that I literally had to go through. There was no escape. There was no way out. And when you lose someone who's really close to you, there is no escape from that pain. There is no way out from that pain. There is no ignoring the pain. And yes, you can take drugs, or you can drink alcohol, or you can use something else as a distraction. But when the high wears off and the drunk wears off and the distraction is no longer there, you come face to face with that pain. And that's why it's so important to process grief. Process it as you need to process it. Nobody can or gets to tell you how you should, must, or can process the pain. Now, there is help that is available to you to process the pain. There is help that is available for you to move through it in a way that is successful, in a way that helps you to get to the other side. But the process of grief is very personal. It's very individual. And the only person who can process your grief for you is you. Somebody can be there to walk you through it, to talk you through it, to hold your hand, to give you some advice, to give you some suggestions, to give you some tools. I work with a lot of clients who are dealing with grief, and there are a lot of tools that I give them. And yes, I'm there to hold their hand. I'm there to love them. I'm there to encourage them. I'm there to power them up. But that process of moving through the grief is something that every individual needs to do for themselves. And I can tell you today that if you are processing grief right now, if you are currently going through the sadness and the pain and the darkness of losing a loved one, I want you to know that there is the other side. I want you to know that even though you don't see a light right now in that dark tunnel, I want you to know that if you keep going, if you keep moving towards finding the light, I want you to know that you will find it. I want you to also know that the pain lessens. It never goes away though. I'm going to be really honest with you. There are some days now that all of a sudden, the other day I was having a conversation with my son, and all of a sudden I was talking about my sister and I was back in the morgue. I was looking at her dead body and I felt an overwhelm of emotion and sadness, and I burst into tears. And he was there to comfort me through it. So it never leaves you completely. But if you give yourself permission to process it in the way that you need to, regardless of what anybody else thinks that you should do, I want you to know that there are better days, that there are lighter days. There are days when you will smile again. And if you need some help with that, if you need help processing pain today, if you need help moving through grief, if you need help coming face to face or even coming to terms with the loss, click on the link in the description box and let's have a conversation. But you can get to the other side. And I want to encourage you today to choose to get to the other side. Don't decide how long it's going to take to get there. Don't put a time limit on yourself. Don't put pressure on yourself. But just choose today to feel joy again. Choose today to one day smile again. Choose today to feel better in the future. And I promise you, if you set an intention to do that, you will get there. And if you need to talk some things through and you want to continue this conversation, then let's continue the conversation over in the Soul Therapy Saturdays group on Facebook. Click on the link in the description and I'll let you in over there so we can chat a little bit more about this, okay? I am so committed to helping you and supporting you on your mental and emotional wellness journey. If you need some help processing the pain, processing the loss, processing the grief, and it might not just be because you lost a loved one to death. It might be that you lost a loved one in a relationship. It might be that you lost a career. It might be that you lost a job. Grief can be experienced in so many different areas on so many different levels. If you need some help with that, click on the link in the description box and let's have a conversation. And until next time, sweetie, I want you to remember that if you desire it, you do deserve it. And if you deserve to smile again, if you deserve to be happy again, if you deserve to feel joy in your heart again, then you can have it.